The church bells were already ringing when Lord Cashin disappeared. Evelina stood behind the heavy chapel doors, her hands trembling inside white gloves, unaware that the groom she was about to marry was miles away, running from a life he never wanted. Inside the vestry, Duke Alaric Ravensworth read his brother's hurried note twice, his jaw tightening with every word. Cashin had fled to escape a marriage arranged since childhood, leaving nothing behind but shame and a wedding full of waiting guests. Alaric had only minutes to decide. Outside, 300 guests filled the pews, including powerful men whose respect his family could not afford to lose. A cancelled wedding would not just embarrass them, it would destroy years of careful alliances and possibly ruin Evelina's reputation forever, through no fault of her own. Alaric had spent his whole life protecting his family's name, sacrificing his own wishes again and again. This morning would be no different. He straightened his coat, stepped into the shadows near the altar, and waited for the doors to open. When Evelina walked down the aisle, her face hidden behind a delicate veil, she noticed nothing unusual. She had barely spoken to Cashin in years and had grown used to a groom who rarely looked her way. She kept her eyes low, her heart heavy with resignation rather than joy, thinking of a different man entirely, one she had loved long before this match was ever arranged. The ceremony moved quickly. Vows were exchanged in hushed, formal tones, and Alaric answered every question with practiced calm, careful not to raise suspicion. His voice was deeper than his brother's, but grief and nerves in the room covered the difference. Guests wiped tears, unaware they were witnessing a deception born from desperation, not romance. The priest pronounced them husband and wife, and applause echoed through the chapel as Alaric slipped a ring onto Evelina's finger, feeling the full weight of what he had just done. Only when they climbed into the wedding carriage did reality begin to shift. Evelina reached up to lift her veil, expecting to finally see her husband's face clearly. Her fingers froze halfway. The man beside her was not Cashin. Broader shoulders, sharper eyes, an unfamiliar stillness in his expression. Everything about him was wrong for the groom she had expected. Confusion turned quickly into disbelief as she stared at Alaric, searching his face for some explanation that made sense. Alaric met her gaze without flinching, though guilt burned quietly beneath his composed exterior. There was no way to soften what had happened, no gentle way to explain a decision made in a matter of minutes to save two families from ruin. As the carriage rolled forward through cheering crowds outside, Evelina realized her wedding day had not gone as planned, and the man sitting across from her was now, legally and irreversibly, her husband. The carriage ride to Ravensworth Hall felt endless. Evelina refused to speak, her arms crossed tightly, her mind racing through every possible explanation for what had just happened. Alaric finally broke the silence, explaining calmly that Cashin had fled that morning, and that stopping the ceremony would have destroyed her reputation beyond repair. He told her the marriage was legally binding, performed in good faith before witnesses, and could not simply be undone without scandal touching them both. Evelina felt fury rise in her chest, sharper than any emotion she had allowed herself in years. She had not chosen this man, had never once considered him as anything beyond her fiancé's older brother, distant and unreadable. To learn she had married him without her knowledge, without any choice at all, felt like another decision made for her by people who never asked what she truly wanted. She turned toward the window, refusing to let him see how deeply the betrayal had settled into her. At the grand estate, servants greeted them with polite bows, careful not to reveal any surprise at their new mistress. Alaric had clearly given instructions ahead of time, ensuring no one questioned the sudden change in circumstances. Evelina was shown to a private chamber, far from the master's quarters, a small mercy she noticed immediately. It seemed Alaric intended this to remain a marriage in name only, nothing more. That evening they shared a quiet dinner in near silence, broken only by necessary words about the household and their new arrangement. Alaric spoke plainly, without warmth, explaining that she would want for nothing, that her position as Duchess came with respect and comfort, even if affection could not be promised. Evelina studied him carefully across the table, searching for cruelty or coldness, yet finding only exhaustion and duty weighing on his shoulders. She thought of Julian then, the man she had loved quietly for years before her engagement to Cassian had ever been arranged. A future with him had always felt impossible, blocked by class and family expectation. Now, married to a stranger through no choice of her own, that impossible future felt even further away. Evelina resolved that night to protect her heart completely, to treat this marriage as a formality and nothing more, no matter how long she remained inside these unfamiliar walls. Alaric, retreating to his study long after she had gone to bed, sat alone with his thoughts, unable to shake the image of her stunned expression in the carriage. He told himself the decision had been necessary, unavoidable, the only way to prevent disaster. Yet some quiet part of him wondered, uncomfortably, whether he had taken something from her that could never truly be given back, no matter how many comforts his title could provide. Weeks passed at Ravensworth Hall, and a fragile routine settled over the household. Evelina spent her mornings walking the gardens and her afternoons with the household staff, discovering she had a talent for managing the estate's affairs that no one had expected. Alaric noticed this quietly from a distance, watching her correct accounting errors the housekeeper had missed for months, watching her speak kindly to servants others barely acknowledged. Slowly, his image of her as simply a burden began shifting into something more complicated. Then Julian arrived. Hired to restore the estate's old library and eastern wing, he had no idea whose home he had been sent to work on until he saw Evelina crossing the courtyard one morning. Their eyes met with the shock of old memory rushing back all at once. Years had passed since they last spoke, since circumstances had torn them apart before their feelings could ever be openly acknowledged. Now, fate had placed them under the same roof again, and neither could pretend the connection had faded. They began meeting in the library during his working hours, conversations that started about renovation plans slowly turning personal. Julian confessed he had never stopped thinking about her, that losing her to an arranged engagement had haunted him for years. Evelina, starved for genuine warmth in her strange new marriage, found herself drawn back into old feelings she thought she had buried. Yet guilt lingered beneath every stolen conversation, a quiet awareness that she was now a married woman, bound by vows spoken to another man entirely. Meanwhile, Alaric found his own feelings shifting in ways he did not welcome. He began seeking her out at dinner, asking about her day, offering small observations that hinted at genuine curiosity rather than obligation. One evening, he complimented the changes she had made to the estate's finances, and she looked at him with surprise, unused to praise from a man she had assumed felt nothing beyond duty. For the first time since their wedding, something like understanding passed quietly between them. Still, the presence of Julian complicated everything. Evelina found herself torn between the safety of old love and the unexpected warmth growing in her marriage, uncertain which feelings she could trust. She told herself the meetings with Julian meant nothing beyond friendship, yet she began choosing her words carefully whenever Alaric asked about her days in the library. Secrets, however small, had begun taking root inside a household already built upon one significant deception, and Evelina knew, uneasily, that such secrets rarely stayed buried for long. The discovery came suddenly. Passing the library one evening, Alaric overheard Evelina and Julian speaking in low, familiar tones, their conversation carrying the unmistakable weight of shared history rather than simple friendship. He stood frozen in the hallway, listening to Julian speak of missed years and unfinished feelings, and something sharp and unexpected twisted inside his chest, a feeling he refused to name as jealousy even as it settled deep and heavy. He confronted her later that night, his voice controlled despite the storm building beneath it. Evelina, caught between shame and defiance, admitted the truth without hesitation, refusing to apologize for a connection that existed long before their forced marriage began. She reminded him sharply that she had never chosen this life, that her heart had belonged elsewhere long before he stepped into his brother's place at the altar. Her words landed harder than she intended, and silence stretched heavy between them. Alaric said nothing for a long moment, staring at the fire rather than at her. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier edge, replaced instead by something quieter and more honest. He admitted that the marriage had been built entirely on necessity, not fairness, and that he had never truly considered what she had lost that morning at the altar. He told her plainly that she deserved a choice, something neither of them had been given when vows were exchanged in haste. To her surprise, he revealed that Cassian had returned days earlier, quietly, ashamed of what his cowardice had caused. Alaric had already begun arranging for an annulment, willing to face the scandal publicly if it meant freeing her from a marriage she never wanted. He explained that Cassian was prepared to confess everything, regardless of the damage to the family name, if it meant correcting the wrong done to her. Evelina sat in stunned silence, unprepared for this sudden offer of freedom. Part of her had expected anger, punishment, perhaps even coldness following the discovery of her secret meetings with Julian. Instead, Alaric offered honesty and release, asking nothing in return beyond her forgiveness for the deception that had trapped her in the first place. As he left the room that night, Evelina remained by the fire, staring at the flickering flames, suddenly uncertain whether freedom was truly what her heart wanted anymore. News of the annulment spread quickly through society, along with the truth of what had happened on the wedding day months earlier. Cassian, true to his word, confessed publicly to his cowardice, accepting the judgment of those who had once respected him. Rather than the disaster everyone feared, most people responded with sympathy toward Evelina, admiration for Alaric's honesty, and quiet disappointment in Cassian alone. The scandal, though painful, passed faster than anyone expected. With her freedom finally within reach, Evelina found herself facing an unexpected question, one she had not anticipated needing to answer. Julian, sensing the shifting situation, asked her plainly whether she intended to finally choose the future they had once dreamed about together. Standing before him, Evelina searched her own heart carefully, expecting to find the same certainty she had carried for years, yet finding instead something quieter, more complicated, harder to define. She realized, slowly and with some surprise, that her feelings for Julian belonged to a version of herself that no longer existed, a young woman shaped by longing for a life she was never allowed to choose. The months spent at Ravensworth Hall had changed her, revealing strength she never knew she carried, and revealing unexpected respect, then something deeper, for the man forced into marriage alongside her. Julian, watching her expression shift, understood the answer before she spoke a single word. Evelina found Alaric in his study that evening, papers for the annulment spread across his desk, awaiting only her final signature. She stood quietly in the doorway, watching him for a long moment before speaking. She told him plainly that she no longer wished to sign the papers, that somewhere between deception and honesty, obligation and understanding, she had come to care for him deeply, not as a duty, but as a genuine choice freely made. Alaric looked up, searching her face for certainty, finding none of the earlier resentment that once colored her expression toward him. Rising slowly from his desk, he crossed the room and took her hands gently, asking if she was certain, giving her every opportunity to reconsider before answering himself. She nodded without hesitation, her earlier fury long since replaced by quiet conviction. Months later, they exchanged vows again, properly this time, before family and friends who finally understood the truth. Evelina lifted her veil herself on this second wedding day, meeting the eyes of the man she now chose completely, having found real love where deception had once stood in its place.